are listening to the Pedagogy Primer podcast. I'm Dr. Mark Gallimore, Director for the Center for Online Learning and Innovation at Canisius College in Buffalo, New York. This podcast is a multi-episode introduction to teaching in higher education. This episode features a conversation with Dr. Graham Stowe, Director of the Canisius College Writing Center, where we discuss methods and support for student writing in our courses and across our disciplines. Now more than ever, student writing can be a fantastic vehicle for encouraging creativity and critical thinking, and there are many ways we can better integrate writing assignments into our course plans. Dr. Stowe brings fantastic insights and practical tips for supporting the student writers in your courses. Joining me today is Dr. Graham Stowe, Director, Canisius College Writing Center, and Assistant Professor of English. How are you today, Graham?
I'm good, Mark. How are you? Not
bad, as well as can be expected in our 2020 COVID-19 era.
Yeah.
And that's a great segue because I think we're all preoccupied with different ways to teach and learn under very extraordinary circumstances, to put it mildly. And at a school like Canisius College, writing is always central to our pedagogical project. And so I think we could start off, if you could briefly describe the Canisius College Writing Center.
Sure. Our center is all peer tutors who work with students at any stage of the writing process in any discipline on any kind of assignment or writing that a student is doing. We have tutors in majors from English to psychology to business. And one of our psychology majors is going to med school next year. So she told me just yesterday she's helping with an organic chemistry study session this weekend. And so like she's doing, we have people who can write in any kind of field, the hard sciences to the social sciences to the humanities. And students make appointments and talk to a tutor about whatever their assignment is. We really think of tutoring in the center as a conversation between two writers about writing. So people come in with things, pretty much finished, and they want help polishing, and so we talk about polishing. They come in with nothing written at all, and we'll talk to them about how to approach the assignment. And then a lot of people come halfway in between those two, and they're stuck on page 2 of a 4-page paper, and they're not sure what to do next. And we work with them on where those things might go.
So it sounds like you've got to have quite a set of tools in this workshop, because you're writing or helping students write across a variety of different disciplines here at the college. What role do you think writing plays in different disciplines on campus, and how that influences how you have to think about writing as the director for the Writing Center?
I think there's at least 3 different ways that writing functions in college level classes. And these, I've broken them apart. It's a little artificial, I think, because the lines are really fuzzy between them. I think they all build together. But the first one is us asking students to show us what they know, what they've learned about a particular key concept in a discipline. Can a psychology student explain the foundational understandings of the subconscious? Can a biology student tell us how the cell works? Or a history student explain the causes of the First World War? Just these are the things that happened that in a field, or that we need to know. You got to know the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell, right? And that some of that stuff just needs to be there so that we can then do the next step. And this one is part of that too. It's what compositionists would call writing to learn, where you take these kinds of foundational things, and we ask students to start playing with them, to start messing around with them. These are low stakes assignments, journal entries, reading logs, quick short answers that you might ask for students to do in class, discussion board posts if you're online. And we want students to start thinking about material from the first point, the mitochondria stuff, or the causes of the First World War, and interrogate them for what they might mean for the class. So I often talk about Marbury versus Madison when I talk about this, because it's something most people know. So they're studying Marbury versus Madison, and we want them to be able to say, this case established judicial review in the United States. That's the kind of factual thing. But then we want them to talk about what that means historically, if that didn't exist beforehand, or what it might mean for the country moving forward. And what they can do, and they might be wrong, they might come up with answers that are sort of all over the place, but they're starting to work with the material to learn about it. So we want them to really kind of dig into that and figure out what those things mean. So what it means in a broad historical context. So a student might know how to describe Plato's cave, but what a philosophy professor really wants from them is not just, this is the room, the way the room was situated. They want them to think about what that means. What is reality? What does it mean if everything is filtered through something else? And it works in the social sciences too. The writing is different, but the meat of those kinds of that kind of writing are the discussion sections in the social sciences and the hard sciences. And to do that in a low stakes setting is helpful for our students, because it kind of allows them to practice it without the weight of a grade over them. But then this third thing we ask for are these formal traditional papers, what we think of when you say, I'm writing an essay for my class this weekend. And so if we take the writing to learn material and then shift to the rhetorical concept of invention, is a better way to think of this. So invention in rhetoric is a search for an argument. Aristotle's appeals to logic, credibility, and emotion, logos, pathos, and ethos, are the things that we're talking about here. And it's an entry point for most people in rhetoric, and everybody covers that in English 111 or your entry level freshman classes. And there's a good reason for it. It kind of gives us a way to structure an argument and to think about an argument. Some folks use stasis theory for this, questions of fact, definition, quality, or jurisdiction, which for our purposes, it would be some kind of proposal argument. So to use these kinds of things to develop the more formal material from the second step that I was talking about, that were, when you start to play around with ideas in those low stakes settings. In the sciences and the hard sciences, these come a little differently because the formal papers all kind of look the same: introduction, literature review, methods, results, and discussion. But what I think most professors are looking for are students to really dig into that discussion section to talk about what the other four things meant, for what the experiment meant that they did, or what the study meant that they did. And the humanities were looser with form, right? That, yeah. But we generally still have kind of what we, expectations that the thesis is going to be early in that paper. It doesn't always wind up, students often put it as the last sentence of the first paragraph. It doesn't always have to be there, but they think it does. But that kind of thing is what we expect in the American Academy. So we start with a thesis and then outline some argument and defend it in the same kind of way that a science professor expects a discussion at the end that explains what the project meant.
So students are really trying out thinking in a discipline via writing, it sounds like.
Yeah.
From a faculty perspective, should we be mindful of the fact that our students do write differently to serve different disciplinary priorities? So as a historian, in what way should I be thinking about or be cognizant of the fact that my students are studying to be biologists? They're in my history class, but they're also in biology classes, and they may be writing for biologists, colleagues of mine across campus.
I had my undergraduate advisor told me that my undergraduate degree was going to be my hardest one. I don't know if that's true.
Bold statement.
But his point was that we students to shift between rhetorical modes all the time. They go from history class to biology class to psychology class, and sometimes all in one day. And we ask them to speak the language of those fields each time. So I think it would be important to keep that in mind. And your biology students are going to lean heavily on they're going to want some kinds of formulas. And then as a historian, you're probably like, well, there isn't one. And but they like to have the idea of what the paper should look like before it's done. Whereas your English students in a history class might, be okay with less kinds of structure ahead of time. So I think it's important for us to know what our students are studying so that we can then kind of evaluate what they do based on that. I think there's a concept of fairness that I talk about sometimes with my tutors. What does fair mean? Does it mean that I grade and evaluate every student on exactly the same scale? I don't think it does. I think fair means we evaluate that student based on where they are as students. And so finding a spot for the biology student to write a paper on military history is, and if it reads like a biologist wrote it, I think we should probably expect that.
Yeah. In the past, you've said that our culture surrounding students writing can change and maybe should change across disciplines. What are some new or at least different perspectives you think faculty should consider compared to what you've seen and in your own experience teaching is often the case in American higher education?
Can I get on a soapbox, Mark?
Absolutely. That's what we're here for.
The thing that bothers me the most when I'm walking around campus or I'm in the elevator is when I hear professors talk about writing and they say, well, students just can't write. And I think that's patently false. Students write all the time. They write more than we did when we were in college. They communicate with friends in writing more than speaking. They navigate these complicated rhetorical terrain the way we were just talking about with shifting between classes, but then they also communicate with each other, with us, with their parents, with their bosses, with all these different kinds of places where they have to shift the way that they communicate with somebody that we either it was maybe simpler for us. A lot of us, I didn't have to work very much when I was in college. I worked like a very small part-time job because it was easier 25 years ago. And then, and you hear stories about the 70s, you could pay your tuition on a part-time job, and that's not possible these days. And so also, professors have never not complained about their students. I just last night I found I don't know anything about this person named Egbert of Liege, who wrote in the 11th century that scholarly effort is in decline everywhere as never before. And in 1878, a Harvard professor said that his students were making blunders which would disgrace a 12-year-old. And then Andrea Lunsford, who's one of my favorite compositionists, looked at artifacts from as long ago as 1917 and has discovered, this was in an article written in 2008, that the number of errors in writing has remained consistent in general. And so one of the things that I think that we can do to rethink writing is to consider how many of these mistakes are really important to us. I would suggest that unless a grammatical error hinders understanding, that you should ignore it. That if you're reading a paper and in that first paragraph there's a comma splice, don't circle it. Just let it go, and see if we can find the things they do know through the writing, rather than starting with a deficit model that assumes that there's a series of problems you're going to find, and that we have to then to discover what it is that they're going to find.
Take points off.
And take points off, yes.
And the take points off model.
And they can, and I think they do a pretty good job shifting between these rhetorical modes, and they can do it. And so if you take something like the vocational model of college, which I personally think is a pretty short-sighted vision of college, it doesn't actually change anything, though, if we do this, because writing is always a conversation. And if students are going to college to then go get a job in the field that they studied in college, they're not ever going to be writing alone. They're going to be able to take that important email and say to the colleague in the next office, to be able to say, hey, can you look over this so we can work on it together, because before I send it to our boss, because we need to make sure that this that they understand this. If we then take a more, a traditional view, a critical thinking approach to colleges, and if our goal is to produce critical thinkers, which I think it should be, rather than cogs in a machine, then what matters is critical thinking and not the comma splices. I happen to find comma splices annoying. But I think that's, but they don't affect my understanding of an essay. I find them annoying because I'm a white guy, went to a private school, I learned grammar, I was raised in an upper middle class family who was taught to find them annoying. And so it's not because there's any real logic behind them, other than that it's an arbitrary rule that is a rule because grammar is a thing. And so when we do something like this, when we say to our students of color, for example, that their writing isn't good, even when it shows a better critical understanding of course material than a white student who wrote something error-free, what we're saying is that their culture isn't good enough, and that something is wrong with who they are. And I don't want Canisius to be that kind of place. I would like it to be the kind of place where we value the person first and, work on those things. I don't think this means that grammar doesn't matter. When I was thinking about this last night, that what I think we should ask, the perspectives that I would like faculty to consider, is to think very, very hard about what it is that you want from a writing assignment and why you want those things. And then think very hard about how you choose to respond to student writing. About once a year, someone in the Writing Center world gets in trouble with the press for saying grammar doesn't matter. A couple of years ago, it was Tucker Carlson and the Purdue Writing Center, because they had a handout on their website that said that students should avoid sexist language. The handout had been there for 15 years, and Tucker Carlson just pulled it and complained about it. A couple of years before that, it was University of Washington. Like, these things come up all the time, but that's never actually what the person in my position says. What we're really saying is that grammar and what's right and wrong in grammar is culturally determined, and language is very, very complicated, and different rhetorical situations call for different kinds of responses. And writing teachers and tutors, our aim should be to help students navigate these complicated different voices and the way that they affect these situations. So organization, paragraph structure, argument, evidence, all that stuff is still going to matter, but there's not one single answer to them. To those questions.
Yeah. Well, so now we're faced with this special set of circumstances surrounding COVID-19. We're sort of teetering on the edge of being fully remote. If to read the headlines, I think a lot of colleges and universities will be fully remote in the next few weeks and months, into 2021. And Canisius very well may be one of them. What are some, let's start maybe with nuts and bolts. What are some practical writing activities that you think are particularly valuable as we have a huge population of students now in online courses, and they really didn't envision themselves as online students. They may even know that they enrolled in courses that would go online, but they didn't think of themselves as going to college for online programs.
I think there's two things to think about here. One is that students think online is not going to be as robust as in person. And we can either live up to that expectation or live down to it, I guess. Or we can make these online courses, following the course you put together for for us to learn about teaching online, um, and really make these online things really valuable, and where they learn the same kinds of material, but they just learn it in a different way. So writing activities for a course, I really like the discussion boards. I know that students sort of crank out those answers, but I think there's ways that we can make them um, really valuable for students. So one of the things I like to do, and I need to admit up front that I stole this from Jen Stowe, the director of the literacy program here, and I happen to be married to her. That she does, and her program is all online, is to put students into small groups on a discussion board, and have them respond to each other in these 4-person groups. So everybody has to write a response to a reading assignment, and then everybody has to respond to their peers. And she may have gotten it from you, Mark. I'm not sure. Did she?
She very well may have brought that with her to Canisius
Oh, okay.
College. My office is as much or more has learned from Jen Stowe's work as anything she may have picked up from us. Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah. So, and what that does is that it doesn't recreate a small group discussion in a classroom. And I think we need to stop trying to recreate things, but we need to create a new thing that's different. And students then are practicing their writing as they respond to each other. It's low stakes. I grade these things on a completion or not complete. Like my grade book right now has a lot of complete or incompletes in it without a lot of numbers. And if they respond with kind of a half-hearted answer, you can respond to them and say, hey, this feels kind of half-hearted, dig in a little bit more. And then you still give them credit for doing it. They did something. But then you also you chastise them a little bit publicly so that they then, respond more thoroughly the next time. So those small group kinds of discussion boards are a little less pressure for the students than responding to the whole class, and they know the whole class is going to see it. Or even worse than the whole class seeing it is the whole class not reading any of it, except for you say they need to respond to one other person, so then they only read it to one other person, and they lose track of the rest of the things other people have to say. I also like journal entries. In an in-person class, I usually have students write 4 kind of major essays, and then 5 one single-spaced page journal entry in which anything goes. They can write about how much they hate this week's reading, whatever they want to do, and I would increase the number of those if I was teaching a fully online course, maybe even once a week, to have students write a full. And I say 1-page single-spaced because I'm holding on to when I used to collect these as hard copies and I was trying to save paper. But it actually works on the screen too, because again, I can see the whole thing on one screen, and I can read it quickly and give them the check mark for doing it, and go on from there. And this is something we've talked about a lot. That sounds like what we've done is creating a ton of work for professors. And it is work, but here is something I know I've told you, sort of a dirty little secret of writing teachers is that we don't have to read everything they write. The point is that they're doing the writing, not that we read it. And so sometimes if you read it real quick to make sure they did it and took it seriously, and you read a whole class's worth of journal entries in 30 minutes, you spent, a minute or so on each one, then you're getting through it. And what matters is that they're thinking and they're working on it, and you give them credit. Then for the major essays, really dig in and give some substantial feedback. But for these low stakes things, we call them low stakes because they spend less time on them and we're spending less time on them.
Yeah. I think that gets to this. You sort of touch upon that there's value in them writing, even if we're not then responding with extensive feedback to every sentence they wrote. In this COVID-19 era, do you think, let's unpack that a little bit. Is there a value in writing for students as they're struggling with this socially distanced education? and all the other circumstances in their lives. Is there a special place, do you think, for writing in because it's tough to be a college student right now in 2020?
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly and I'm not a psychologist, but I do know that when to make it personal for a second, when we went online and there was a lockdown, I downloaded a journaling app for my phone, and I started just writing down things that were happening, and I found that helped me sort of process what was going on and all the things that were inability to see family, and I don't know how to teach online, and how am I going to grade all these papers, and I had students changing their topics because of the lockdown, everything. And so, yeah, I think one thing it'll help them do is process this stuff emotionally. Now, our chemistry teachers and our English teachers and our history teachers, we're not really qualified to help students process things emotionally, but that doesn't mean our work isn't going to help them process things emotionally. And so
Yeah.
we might not necessarily have the skill set to say, well, you should do it this way, but we can then refer them on to people who, if we think they show signs that they need to see a counselor or something. I'm not sure if that was your question, but
I think so. And that's a really good point, that we're not, this isn't necessarily a therapeutic exercise in the sense that they could expect, a professional counseling, back in but just to be able to have their say on paper or digitally, so to speak, may have a certain value in getting through their day-to-day struggles, or at least putting them into context.
Yeah, and so writing is always, I said before, it's always a conversation, and one of the participants in that conversation is the writer, and so as you put something on paper or on the screen, you're then starting to have a conversation with it. One example I give of this all the time is when students they write something down and it's not what they meant to say. And it happens to all of us all the time.
Yeah.
It's like, well, I had this idea and it came out different. And that, I think, is an example of us engaging in a conversation with ourselves. We might not know it. Or another example is when you wind up with a really good idea in the shower, and then you hop out and you write it down, or you hop out and you don't write it down, and then you're frustrated because you forget it. And the writing process is happening around us, and through us all the time. When we have an assignment due, you're like, well, you sleep on it, and on the next morning you have a new idea, and it's because you started thinking about it. And sometimes the way we think about it is to start writing things down, which is why we assign these low stakes journal entries and discussion boards, to start getting those things out so that the process is started before they sit down to write the major essay.
Yeah. Well, and I guess we have to, as long as we're discussing this in a COVID-19 context, obviously a lot of college faculty right now are working very, very hard. I don't think anybody listening to this podcast would disagree with that statement. And so we do need to think about practical nuts and bolts ways to sustain our effort. And sometimes the word sustainable is so sterile to me. We got to find a way to make this keep working day after day, week after week. This isn't selfish. We need to use our available time, resources wisely, so we avoid our burnout, our students' burnout, our students suffering our burnout. So in terms of writing, what are ways faculty can be more efficient and just sustain their attention, their cognitive energy themselves throughout this long semester, while at the same time teaching through writing?
One thing, to go back to something I said before, is to take our focus away from the line by line assessment of writing. And instead of doing that, in some cases, do almost none of that, and do a substantial endnote in the in D2L, in the comment section, and say, these are the things I think you need to work on. And if you need to refer to particular places in the essay, it's easy enough to do that, say in the third paragraph or the first full paragraph on page 2.
Yeah.
You can still refer to those things, but then, and this feels like just like this feels like maybe it's not going to save a ton of time, but if you're using the Turnitin commenting functions, and if you stop doing the in-body commentary and do it all at the end, that stuff is going to add up over the course of grading 3 classes worth of papers. Let's say that's 30 students per class, 90 papers. And if you save a couple of minutes on each one, you're saving a substantial amount of time. And then what you're able to do then is focus in on the argument and the substantial material that the student is responding to, so that you can say something like, it wasn't just the assassination of the Archduke that started the First World War.
Yeah.
It was a series of events that led up to that, and it just happened to be the I always say the needle that broke the camel's back. It's the straw that broke the camel's back, and there's a needle in the haystack.
It may depend on translation.
Yeah.
And beyond these, do you have any other steps for? Often in my offices, in my experience, faculty will say, I don't know where to begin, and I can't rebuild my course because I start teaching it in 3 weeks. Do you have any, you've already sort of suggested some, but do you have any other easy first steps that faculty could implement for a class they start teaching next week, let's say, just hypothetically? And they can be small steps that would improve how they use student writing in their classes.
I think one thing that we can all work on is our assignment sheets. And this is true for in-person and online courses. There's kind of a happy medium between the assignment sheet that says go write a paper and the assignment sheet that's 4 double-spaced pages, or 4 front and back pages explaining exactly what a paper should look like. As a rule of thumb, I think an assignment sheet can be 1 page, one front of the page, with some bullet points in the middle, sort of fill up the page, and gives some kind of loose guidelines of what you want the paper to look like, and some explanations of what you expect a good one would look like. I'm not a huge fan of giving sample essays out for what it's worth, because then they all look like the sample. But kind of finding a balance on the assignment sheet, making sure your questions are super clear, because that's going to make your grading easier, because then you know what you've asked and your students know what you've asked. And it's going to save you some time on responding to emails when students ask you questions. I think some of us, and I'm certainly guilty of this, if I've been teaching a class long enough, I don't always, I reuse assignment sheets. Of course we reuse assignment sheets,
sure,
but the context of each class is a little bit different. And so I think it's worth thinking really hard about tweaking your assignment sheets for each class to save yourself some energy on the back end when you're actually doing the responding to the writing and responding to questions about the assignment through the course of the semester, so that because you might have gotten further into World War I in a previous semester than you did by the time you got to the first paper in this semester.
Yeah. So be a little more intentional about and treat assignment prompts, craft them, I think is the way
I think you're right. Craft them
instead of just sort of, pull them off the shelf or write offhand, stream of conscious assignment instructions, which we've all been pressed to do, especially in, when you first start teaching and you're in a hurry.
And for a while I would write a new assignment sheet for every semester, and that was also not a productive approach. Like, there's a balance to, if you're teaching 4 papers in a semester, you have a basic idea of what you're going for. And then one more thing is that it's worth thinking about and remembering that writing is a process, and that sometimes, because of the amount of things on a student's plate, the final thing that you see might not be the finished product, but you can
Yeah.
see where it is in the process of writing. And so figuring out how to sort of um, the term thrown around a lot is scaffolding to for use the low stake assignments to build up to the bigger one. I don't I'm not always a huge fan of that term because I don't know that it translates very well for students to I don't know that they see the low stakes stuff as scaffolding unless we tell them very specifically you can use this in the next thing.
Yeah.
But making sure that you encourage revision, encourage that they write outlines. I think a lot of students write down and just stare at a blank screen and start typing. Um,
Yeah.
and so I know some professors collect outlines. I think that's a good idea. So you see something before it's at the very end to start saying, "Oh, this is going off the rails or going in the wrong direction. Let's figure out what we can do to improve that before it gets to that very end, the product stage."
Yeah. Yeah. And I suppose we all try anyway to keep our eyes also on the horizon, further afield. I know I've tried to do this over the past several years with teaching. What are some ways faculty can make beneficial but systemic or more comprehensive changes that they acknowledge are probably going to take several semesters? One thought comes to mind is trying to develop a rubric. I never expect a rubric the first or second time I use it to be anywhere near satisfying. But specifically regarding writing, what are some things we can shoot for in the long haul to try to make writing more effective, student writing more effective in our courses?
Well, Mark, that's a big question. Um, I think Canisius and higher ed as a whole needs to create and think about a culture of writing that does this, that really buys into this thing that compositionists have known and been doing and trying to say since the mid 70s, is that writing is always, I just said this, is always a process. And if we can encourage students to recognize and find their route through that process, it's not always going to be the Donald Murray article that started this was pre-writing, writing, revision, and then most of it is revision. And that it was a little too simplified ultimately, because a lot of people, like I'm not great with a bullet point outline. I do a lot of brainstorming first and write kind of messy stuff that comes out on a page, and then I print it out and I rework it, and then I wind up writing a more traditional outline. And so letting students find that path in whatever course it is that the writing is happening. But this also means a big systemic change to the way the whole college considers writing, which is why I say a new culture of writing on the campus, is that if we can do things like, this is going to loop all the way back around to the beginning of our conversation, encourage them to take the messy stuff to the writing center, or take it to a friend and talk about it with that friend, or talk about it with a professor, or take it to the writing center. Then work through the steps really intentionally with each writing assignment that they have. This may mean we assign less writing to get better writing. And maybe even in English 111, we, instead of teaching 4 papers, we teach 2 really good papers or 3 really strong papers. 111 asks for a lot of things. In a lot of ways, it's more than one class at a time, but that's a different a different conversation. But in any class, it can be making sure that students actually do real revision. And so you collect a paper early and then have them revise that paper instead of write several more. I've heard of people doing that, and it sometimes it backfires because students don't know what revision is, and because there's not a consistent message about what writing should be doing across the curriculum.
Yeah.
And so if in one class it's all about the perfect paper that makes the perfect argument, and then in another class it's, build your argument and you can use your journal entries in the paper itself and shift things around, then that is not, it's just not a consistent message. And so then you wind up with people having not knowing exactly what to do.
Yeah. So it sounds in a way like in the long term, we're looking at just revisiting writing across the curriculum as a collective enterprise, and thinking about that at an institutional level instead of what I can do in my own syllabus kind of thing. I got to ask, what practices or trends do you see in college writing that you suspect or firmly believe are counterproductive or even pernicious from a standpoint of student learning, or helping students, grow professionally, personally?
Well, I don't think there's any like pernicious things going on. I think we all this word keeps coming up. We all need to be more intentional about what we want students to do. I think one of the bigger problems we have is coming out of high school, honestly, is that students are this is a cliche, but they're being taught to the tests, and then when they get to college, we say, "Oh, you don't do it that way anymore," and that's not fair to them, and it's not fair to us, and it's not fair to high school teachers who are working very hard to do everything they can. And so one thing we can do is do a better job bridging the gap between a high school senior and a college freshman, and making sure that we do show some links between the writing process, the writing the 5-paragraph essay, to the more sophisticated essays that we're asking for, which are still versions of the 5-paragraph essay. They're longer than that, but it's a good foundation. So instead of saying, don't write the 5-paragraph essay anymore, we need to say, we're changing what you did in that essay in these ways. Your thesis might not be boiled down to one sentence. That's a really hard thing for students to let go of. It would be, it would serve them well to understand that argument is sometimes too complicated for one sentence, that you can't put the causes of the World War I into one sentence, that it might be 3 or 4 different things, at least.
It's sort of a natural process of, building on what they've learned before. It's not a rejection of what they've learned before. Maybe we shouldn't treat it that way. And I have seen where it's fashionable to in faculty Facebook sort of circles to badmouth the 5-paragraph essay, but maybe instead we're really sort of saying to students, this is part of the process from, transitioning from apprentice to journeyman in developing our craft as writers.
Yeah.
So that's, and we'll wrap this up with, of course, the obligatory Jesuit question. We are a Jesuit institution, of course, and we're committed to Ignatian modes and methods and values in learning. And we have a lot of mission statements that are derived directly from Jesuit thinking on education, as well as justice and more broader concerns. So what role does writing play in us being a Jesuit institution?
Well, so part of it is what we were talking about before with Curae Personalis, and that students, part of what they do as a student to take care of themselves is to reflect on their writing, and of course, reflection is part of Jesuit education too, and considering sort of what they're doing within the context of a particular class, and thinking about what it might mean in broader terms than just the philosophy class. Like, how is this going to affect the way I think about both my English class and also how I behave when I'm working at Starbucks? Like these kind of big liberal arts kinds of things that Jesuit education is interested in, and then and that should, I would hope, always lead to some kind of action, some kind of change in the student that that allows them to, see the world in a new way at the very least, and in a bigger picture, see that problem in the world and go out and try to fix it. Um, find the social justice issues that matter to you, and and serve in some way, or write about them. Find the things that connect to your real life in your classes, because your classes are also your real life. Like there's really no distinction to be made there between who you are as a student and who you are as a person in society, as a citizen of the world.
Yeah. Learning is an act.
Yeah.
And is part of action, a critical part of action.
Yeah, the Writing Center, we base a lot of our work on Paulo Freire, and the praxis for him is reflection and action. And so I have students, or my tutors, after they finish, they reflect on what they did, and then they make a plan for what they're going to change for their next session. Like that's the same thing.
A model for all of our students, I think.
Yeah.
Dr. Graham Stowe, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your insights on student writing. I think you've given us a lot to think about, as even in our trying times, and how we can potentially build better coursework for our students, and be better scholar mentors for our students. Thanks again.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you for listening to the Canisius Pedagogy Primer podcast. Relevant links can be found in show notes. For more helpful resources for teaching and learning, visit www.canisius.edu/COLI.